Well, I grew up in Illinois, and I was 5 when the war began and 10 when it was over.
I was 8 when the whole thing, I can remember very clearly.
I was 4 years old, and my dad left the Netherlands to go to New York, and he was out of Amsterdam a couple of days, and the war started.
We moved to New York City when I was 7. We had a very troubled and chaotic family, so I wound up in foster care just about the beginning of the war. And my foster parents were a German family who had escaped from Hitler. And of course, I wasn't mature enough or smart enough to have much understanding of the difference between Germans who were people and Germans who were part of Hitler's thing. So I didn't know exactly what to make of being in a German family while we were at war with Germany.
I was 10. I was born in 33, and so in 43, 44, 45, I was 10, 11, and 12 in Michigan, outside of Detroit.
Some commodities were in very short supply, and there was rationing. And so people got rationing coupons, depending on the size of the family. The sugar was rationed, and coffee was rationed, and butter, and gasoline for the car. And my parents, I remember trading coupons with other people for things that they did not need, for the things that they wished. And I remember particularly because of coffee rationing, my father had to give up his coffee and go to Postum, which was a roasted grain beverage that was a substitute for coffee during the war.
My mother, who was addicted to coffee, she would trade any ration stamps she could, even sugar stamps, for coffee. But she also had a knack for bartering all sorts of things. We raised chickens, and that was a good portion of what we had to eat, but we also had it to trade. So she would trade it to anybody she could think of, and sometimes it ended up being a funny trade. Traded chickens for a bushel of corn. Only it wasn't corn, it was popcorn. And you can't eat popcorn. And she was mad.
And I remember occasionally getting a piece of meat. Mostly it was horse meat. It was a piece the size of maybe 50-cent piece, very small. And we didn't eat all that well.
So I was about 9. I was almost 10 years old and already with my foster family when FDR announced Pearl Harbor. And I was in the living room watching them and listening to it on the radio. And I kind of watched their faces as watching this German family listening to the announcement that Japan had entered the war and Pearl Harbor and all that. And they were typical German cultured people who knew better than to display their feelings to their children. But that was one of my most vivid memories of the war itself. When FDR came on, and he was the only president I had ever known, I thought he was God.
In those days, of course, we didn't have television, so the radio became your big avenue out into the world. And it was very customary in my family, and when we got together with my grandparents in the evening to sit around and just listen to the radio.
Ken was telling me that they also collected aluminum and cans and grease. I don't know what grease was used for, but anyway, we collected all this stuff and gave it to them.
And I remember donating one of my mother's aluminum pans, and I'm not really sure I had permission to do that, by commandeering my mother's aluminum pan in order to help.
We all tried to pitch in and buy victory bonds. You could do it with little bits of money, but in our neighborhood we did it with bond rallies at the schoolyard. And I was a smart ass. I remember singing, dressed in a cowboy outfit, singing, I got spurs that jingle, jangle, jingle. And I really thought I was hot stuff.
You put a dime in and you got that little stamp, and pretty soon you had your, what was it, $10, that in 25 years you could turn it in for $25. And that was a big thing. and it was emphasized so strongly that you were doing your part.
And I remember the student council members coming and taking orders for stamps. My family didn't have a whole lot of money, and I was always embarrassed that I could not buy the stamps, and other people could.
My mother and I were alone for the whole war, okay? My mother would get money from the Red Cross that we lived on. And then I was really, you know, I remember asking my mother, when is Papa coming home and all? She said, we don't know, dear.
I had 10 uncles in World War II, 7 on my mother's side, and my dad's side had 3 of my uncles on my dad's side went in the war. So that was 10 uncles in the war. But if you were the mother of soldiers, you had a plaque in your window with stars on it for how many soldiers, and you had a gold star if one of them died. And my Uncle Buddy died at the Battle of the Bulge. They didn't give you a star for those who came home wounded. My Uncle Jimmy came home with shell shock, and he lived at home with my grandmother from then on.
We had a lot of help from neighbors. As a matter of fact, the lady and her brother who owned our house, came over and told my mother, you don't have to pay rent. Your husband is paying the price. I mean, that was incredible in itself. There was a man on our block. He was a tailor, and he would make clothing for my mother. I'm sure she never paid. And he was just fantastic. We both, to look at pictures of me when I was 7 or 8 years old. I looked fantastic. My mother looked unbelievable. You know, this is so great. One thing about the Dutch, we are Aryans, so the Germans did not come down on us as hard as they would on those who they considered below them, you know. So we didn't have the Warsaw Ghetto or anything like that, but I do remember Jewish families being hauled out of their house, you know, and the teacher had to keep her mouth shut.
At the age of 9, I was lucky and got my first horse. I mean, that was all in those days I wanted, was to be outside riding. And you know, I guess from my vantage point at 9 with that wonderful gift, that was life ahead of me. But then when you came home, you heard these stories.
The real moment when I understood something about the war was when I saw newsreel footage captured from the Germans at the end of the war. It was footage that the Germans had taken to demonstrate what they were doing because they were so proud of it. And I can't even speak of it without feeling what I felt at the time. And it haunted me ever since. And it made me understand somewhat. You've asked about resilience. And I think the German people who were able to escape from Hitler and make a new life here, the family that I lived with and other people that I met, probably thought about it much later in life as I matured a little bit myself. But I think resilience was one of their characteristics that I admired so much.
The last year of the war, it was also the coldest winter in 100 years. We didn't have any coal because the Germans took all the coal for their own use, and so we had to have a stove and potbelly, and we burned all kinds of stuff that we could get to keep the house fairly warm. My father was one of 8, and his family saw it coming. I don't know how, but they did. They said, you get out of there, you come here. So we left that Amsterdam area and went to Friesland. That's a province on the north. It was a good thing because North Holland, where I live, they suffered 20,000 people died of starvation. And I remember the last year of the war that the Americans and the English would drop things out of the airplanes so we'd have food.
What Hitler perpetrated against the Jews has always haunted me. It's hard to describe how it affected me, but as I became interested in theater later on, early in my career, I was at Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. I was privileged to play a significant role in a play called The Wall. And I played the son of the rabbi who joined the Jewish police in order to protect himself from being killed. And made a confrontation where my job was to find weakened and ill people and bring them to the places where they were culling people out to be sent on the trains to the concentration camps. And I find it difficult to even talk about this because it has been a savage memory in my concept of what evil humanity is capable of doing to each other. And one of the reasons I'm so grateful to have found Foothills and the real sense of community, and that everyone is worthy of love and acceptance.
My feelings going through the 5 years of the war, it was a feeling of tremendous patriotism. I mean, that was really the feeling that caught me. I feel there was this level of cooperation in my family, like my brother and I working together to put all those stamps in the numerous books in order for my dad to get gas for his, what he called his filling station. We had to have those books to turn in. So working together for that was another patriotic, being in that little girls' choir. That was very patriotic again. And I was, if you look at the picture, it says, "What have I done to help win the war?" And your mask wearing is a good example of the attitude toward, because by my wearing a mask, I'm not only helping myself, but I'm helping you. That's the element, and again, it's working at that element of respecting the other person as your equal and not wanting them to get ill. It's the extreme individualism that we're having now. It's just, it'll never work.
We learned to be very resilient. I mean, the chicken raising episode, the bartering, the trading, the community gatherings for raising money. This was everybody was in it together.
Everybody wanted to help. Everybody wanted to help.
Of working together, cooperation, and extreme feeling of helping the country. Here I'm 87 now, and that's what comes back to me, is that I really feel strongly that I had a part in helping win the victory, which is the way they put it, the V for victory.
In those days, we knew we were the good guys. We understood the evil of the Axis and the talk about resilience, the ability of the American people to modify their lives in every way they had to either join up. Young men were going into the service and getting sent overseas, and the women were working rivet guns in the airplane factories. We all knew we had to do our bit to be unified in our purpose, because we knew we had to win that war.